Roman tool shocks historians. 2000-year-old Roman metal tool found in Czech Republic could reveal lost armor making technology. A remarkable Roman era metal tool discovered during railway construction in the Czech Republic may help archaeologists understand how the Roman Empire manufactured one of its most iconic military defenses, chainmail armor. Now we take a deeper look and break down this entire story on the AI podcast.
So, imagine you're just sitting on a brand new high-speed train, right? You're commuting through the Czech Republic right now.
Looking out the window, yeah.
Exactly. And you are probably completely unaware that the tracks beneath you were actually built directly on top of like a 2,000-year-old Roman military supply chain.
It really forces you to rethink the ground you walk on, honestly. I mean, we just pave over the ancient world to build our modern infrastructure.
Right.
And we're just completely oblivious to the industrial empires buried literally just a few feet down.
Yeah, but sometimes, the process of building the future well, it accidentally rips the lid off the past. And that actually brings us to the sources we are looking at for today's deep dive.
It's a fascinating set of reports today.
It really is. So we are examining archaeological reports from this massive rescue excavation in the Hana River Valley. Basically, construction crews were prepping a new railway project between Nezamai Slice and Cochin.
Right, which is just supposed to be a standard preliminary survey.
Exactly. But it suddenly exploded into the discovery of over 1,000 underground features.
Yeah, a routine check to ensure they weren't bulldozing anything significant turned into, frankly, one of the most revealing excavations of the decade.
Oh, for sure.
The sheer volume of material they recovered provides this continuous, unbroken timeline of human occupation spanning millennia.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the ultimate discovery here, this rare 2,000-year-old tool that fundamentally rewrites our understanding of the Roman war machine, it just doesn't make any sense unless we understand the foundation of the site.
Yeah, you have to build the context first.
Right. We have to start at the absolute bottom of the dirt and look at how this specific valley became, well, a technological powerhouse.
And that foundation takes us all the way back to the early Bronze Age, specifically the Vaitajov culture.
Okay.
And, the way their world was preserved for us is actually a masterclass in archaeological irony.
It really is. Because the reports detail the discovery of their homes, right? And these were built using woven wooden branches that were coated in thick clay.
Yeah, wattle and daub.
Right. And normally wood rots and clay dissolves, so you would expect literally nothing to survive.
Nothing at all.
But a sudden catastrophe hit this settlement. The houses burned down.
Which was awful for them, obviously.
Right, but it's almost like a prehistoric Pompeii. The sudden, intense heat of the fire didn't just destroy the homes. It basically acted as a flash kiln.
Yes, exactly. It baked that wet clay into rock-hard fragments. So disaster for them resulted in perfect preservation for us.
Yeah, it's wild.
That intense heat fired the clay, freezing the negative impressions of the woven branches and the structural posts right inside the hardened material. Archaeologists call it daub.
So we aren't just left guessing about their architecture based on some dark smudges in the dirt.
Right, we have the literal baked molds of their walls.
And scattered among those hardened walls, the excavators found all the remnants of a really active daily life. I mean, pottery, bone tools, spindle whorls for textile production, decorative beads.
All the standard domestic stuff.
Yeah, but there's one specific item in the source material that immediately jumps out. The archaeologists found a bronze pin featuring a Cypriot-style design. Now, wait a second. Cyprus is an island in the eastern Mediterranean.
That is.
And this dig is in a landlocked valley in the Czech Republic. You can't just walk a bronze pin across prehistoric Europe. How on earth does a design travel that far in the early Bronze Age?
What's fascinating here is the scale of the networks.
Yeah.
It's a staggering distance, especially when you factor in the Alps, these massive river systems, and, dense primeval forests.
All right, it's not a straight shot.
Not at all. But that single pin is the thread pulling a massive geographic web together. It didn't arrive via a single traveler trekking all the way from Cyprus to the Hana Valley.
Okay, so how did it get there?
What you're seeing is the physical evidence of down-the-line relay trade. Goods, designs, and cultural trends were basically being passed from community to community along ancient river arteries.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the early iterations of what would eventually become the Amber Road.
That completely shatters the illusion that Bronze Age communities were these isolated, primitive villages cut off from the world.
Oh, absolutely.
They were actively plugged into a transcontinental network.
And a society plugged into continental trade networks generates immense wealth and stability.
Right.
And as we move forward in time at this site, moving up through the soil layers, we see how that wealth allowed them to develop incredibly complex, labor-intensive rituals.
Which brings us to the Urnfield culture layer. And this is where the narrative takes a really sudden, highly unusual turn.
It gets weird here.
Very weird, because the baseline burial practices for this era are well documented. Even at the specific site, they found a standard grave containing an adult and a child buried together.
Right, the typical inhumation.
And the Urnfield culture itself is literally named for its dominant practice, which is cremating the dead and burying the ashes in urns.
Hence the name Urnfield.
Exactly. So that is exactly what the archaeologists expected to find.
But those expectations were quickly subverted. Because instead of cremated remains, the team started uncovering pits containing partial, uncremated human skeletons.
And the visual from the excavation report is honestly haunting. They opened up this one specific pit and found 6 human skulls.
Just the skulls.
Just the skulls. And they were carefully, deliberately arranged side by side in the dirt. I mean, when you hear 6 skulls in a pit, your mind immediately goes to dark places, right?
Oh, sure. Sacrifices, violence, war.
Exactly. So what are we actually looking at here? Does this imply some kind of darker ritual? Or is it a totally different way of honoring the dead that we've just lost the context for?
Well, lead archaeologist Archaeologists Tager specifically noted that the deliberate arrangement and the total absence of the rest of the skeletons strongly indicate a highly specialized ritual practice.
Okay.
This raises an important question about how monolithic we assume ancient cultures were. In archaeology, when we see isolated skulls carefully curated like this, we often look at the concept of ancestor veneration.
Right, keeping the ancestors close.
Exactly. Think about it. When a settlement becomes a wealthy economic powerhouse, securing your generational claim to that prime real estate becomes paramount.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, curating the remains of your ancestors is a powerful, physical way of cementing your community's deep historical right to the land.
Wow, okay. So instead of a macabre horror story, it's actually more of a sophisticated legal and spiritual claim to their territory.
Exactly. Now, there are other hypotheses, of course. Some scholars suggest specific burial anomalies, like this could be a localized, ritualized response to a sudden epidemic or some sort of crisis.
Sure, panic makes people change their routines.
Right. But what this absolutely proves is that their society possessed a deep, complex spiritual framework that totally defied the broader regional norms of cremation. They had highly specific, localized traditions.
And to understand why they felt the need to so fiercely mark their territory with their ancestors, you really just have to look at how they were generating all that wealth.
The economy behind the scenes.
Exactly, because just outside the ritual and domestic areas, the archaeologists uncovered this industrial-scale operation. Here's where it gets really interesting.
My favorite part.
Right. They found broken crucibles and stone casting molds scattered everywhere. Like, this wasn't just a marketplace trading finished luxury goods.
No, this is the actual factory floor.
The actual factory floor. And the sheer volume of industrial debris, they found axes, knives, needles, and bracelets in various stages of completion.
It all points to a massive localized industry.
Mm-hmm.
And the logistics required to operate a bronze factory of this scale are just mind-boggling.
Because, as you pointed out before, bronze isn't a natural element you can just mine out of the ground.
Right, exactly the opposite. Bronze is an alloy. It's primarily made of copper and tin.
Okay.
And geologically, copper and tin are almost never found in the same place.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they require completely different geological conditions. So
Yeah.
to manufacture bronze, you have to establish reliable, long-distance supply chains to bring raw materials from entirely different geographic regions.
Oh, wow.
You might be getting copper from the Alps and tin from the Ore Mountains, bringing them all the way to this valley, combining them in a crucible, and then mastering the extreme temperatures required to cast them.
That is wild. So finding the crucibles and the molds proves they had mastered that entire logistical nightmare.
Yes. They weren't just the passive recipients of trade. They were the engine driving it.
And laboratory tests are currently underway to chemically analyze the recovered metal objects, right?
They are. And if the chemical signatures confirm local manufacture, it officially designates this valley as a dominant Bronze Age manufacturing powerhouse.
That is so cool.
And this multi-generational expertise, this deeply ingrained local knowledge of complex metallurgy and supply chain management,
Yeah.
it doesn't just fade away over the centuries.
It evolves.
Exactly. The people living in this valley became masters of metal. And eventually, that mastery attracted the attention of the greatest military superpower of the ancient world.
Which brings us to the crown jewel of this excavation. The thing found sitting in the upper Roman-era soil layers.
The big reveal.
Yes. A single tool that completely rewrites the relationship between the Roman Empire and the people living outside its borders. We are talking about a Roman metal calibration plate.
This is such an incredible find. Let's look at the mechanics of this artifact, because its function is the key to its massive historical implications.
Right.
It's a heavy metal plate, and it's pierced with a specific sequence of holes, and each hole is marginally smaller than the last.
So it operates basically just like a pasta maker, but for solid metal.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
If you want to make metal wire, you basically take a thick rod of bronze or iron, and you physically pull it through the largest hole. And the immense friction forces the metal to become slightly longer and slightly thinner.
Right.
Then you pull it through the next hole and the next, clicking down the thickness step by step until you have a perfectly uniform, fine metal wire.
And that uniform wire was arguably one of the most crucial military components in antiquity,
Why is that?
because it was the fundamental building block for Roman chainmail armor, which is known as lorica hamata.
Ah, okay. And creating chainmail requires an agonizing amount of wire. I mean, a single Roman chainmail shirt could contain 30 to 40,000 individual interlocking metal rings.
Which is just a staggering amount of labor for one soldier.
Exactly. You multiply that by an entire Roman legion, and you are looking at an industrial demand for millions of perfectly uniform metal rings.
Billions.
And this calibration plate was the machine pumping out the raw material for that armor, and the archaeologists even found heavy residue caked inside the holes of this specific plate.
Yeah, proving it saw massive continuous industrial use. It wasn't just some experimental tool or a decorative trinket.
No.
It was a heavily utilized piece of heavy machinery.
But wait, I have to jump in here on the Roman connection. We've established that the Hana River Valley is in the modern-day Czech Republic.
Yes.
During the Roman era, this specific territory was deep in Germania. It was well outside the official mapped borders of the Roman Empire.
Right, it's Barbaricum.
So why are historians automatically assuming this pasta maker for metal was churning out rings for Roman legions? Couldn't it just be local Germanic armor? I mean, why assume it's for Rome?
You've hit on the exact reason this discovery is so groundbreaking.
Yeah.
We suffer from this huge modern bias when we look at ancient maps.
What do you mean?
Well, we see the solid line of the Roman limes in the border, and we assume it functioned like a modern militarized brick wall where all commerce and interaction just abruptly stopped.
Like a hard line between civilization on one side and barbarians on the other.
Exactly, and it's a completely false dichotomy. In reality, the Roman border was a highly porous, incredibly dynamic membrane.
Okay.
The Germanic communities living in the Hana Valley were intimately intertwined with Roman economic and military networks. The Romans, above all else, were supreme pragmatists.
They needed stuff, and they didn't care where it came from.
Exactly. They needed an astronomical amount of military material.
Yeah.
And they were fully aware that master metallurgists lived just across the border. Craftsmen whose ancestors had been running industrial-scale bronze factories for centuries.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of history?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it absolutely shatters the traditional concept of a self-contained Roman war machine.
Right.
Because physical, well-preserved Roman manufacturing tools are incredibly rare anywhere in Europe. We usually have to rely on written accounts of their techniques.
Just some guy writing down how they made armor.
Exactly. But this heavy-duty calibration plate offers a direct, tangible link to the actual manufacturing process happening, crucially, outside the empire.
And the laboratory tests are going to be the final nail in the coffin for the old theories. Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
The team is currently testing the metal residue scraped from the holes of the plate. And if the chemical signature of that residue matches known Roman military equipment, the implications are absolute. It proves that Rome didn't rely solely on state-run fabricae, those factories inside the empire, to equip its soldiers.
They outsourced their defense contracts.
Yes. They utilized decentralized supply chains. They tapped into the multi-generational expertise of these Germanic craftsmen to get their armor produced efficiently.
That is wild.
The greatest military force of the ancient world was actively working with independent contractors in neighboring non-Roman regions.
So if you're listening to this and you're picturing a massive centralized Roman factory pumping out armor for every legionnaire, you just have to erase that image.
Completely.
What we're actually looking at is startlingly modern. I mean, we hear buzzwords in the news today about outsourced military production and decentralized global supply chains, and we just pat ourselves on the back for being so innovative.
Like we invented it yesterday.
Exactly. We think globalization is a product of the digital age.
But human economic pragmatism rarely changes,
Yeah.
We just invent different tools to achieve the exact same goals. Rome was navigating complex cross-border supply chains and offshore manufacturing simply because it was the most efficient way to get the job done.
It is honestly a phenomenal vertical journey we've taken through the dirt today.
Truly from the bottom up.
Just consider the layers of human ingenuity we've unpacked. At the absolute bottom, you have the flash-baked clay daub of early Bronze Age homes sitting alongside a bronze pin that traveled impossible distances through ancient river networks.
And then moving upward, we encountered the profound, silent mystery of the Urnfield culture, where 6 carefully curated skulls challenge everything we assumed about ancient territorial claims and spiritual rituals.
And above that, we walked onto the smoky, bustling factory floor of a Bronze Age production hub, littered with the crucibles and molds of a society that had completely mastered transcontinental heuristics.
And finally, resting in the upper layers right beneath the path of a modern high-speed railway, we find a heavily used industrial calibration plate.
Right.
A single, unassuming tool that proves this localized metallurgical powerhouse eventually evolved into an outsourced military contractor for the Roman Empire.
It's a sweeping epic of human industry, and it's told entirely through the discarded trash and forgotten foundations left behind in the mud.
It really makes you think.
Which leaves you with a final thought to ponder long after this deep dive ends. We only know about this massive cross-border Roman military outsourcing network because of a single, heavily used metal plate that someone dropped in the dirt 2,000 years ago.
Just one tool.
Right. So imagine the future. When archaeologists of the year 4026 are digging up the rusted ruins of our high-speed rail lines, what single everyday tool of our modern, invisible supply chains will survive the centuries to completely rewrite the story they tell about us?
Okay, one question for you. Why are archaeologists calling this railway excavation one of the most significant discoveries in the region? And what secrets does it reveal about 2000 years of history? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.